You're listening to a Meatsmith Harvest. This is the podcast that encourages and equips you to grow your home around the harvest. Hello, Meatsmiths.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome to another podcast. This is our 11th episode. Can you believe that?
Oh, good for us.
Yeah, one less than 12. We're at almost the year mark, actually, because we've been doing about one a month. So.
Okay. Wow, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we started out with being a little more ambitious. Actually, I wanted to talk about this anyway, but we had wanted to do 2 a month. Mm-hmm. And that changed for a number of reasons. Partly because we couldn't get to it, but also the nature of our conversations have changed. Mm-hmm. They've become longer.
Oh, okay.
You know, yeah. and so instead of doing, I just kind of went with it and I became okay with it that we had originally wanted to do 2 at around an hour or 45 minutes. And that like quickly does we talk way longer than that. So now we're doing about 1 a month at 2 hours or hour and a half. And
cool.
So anyway, it feels like there's a lot of content there now.
Yeah.
And so that's exciting. So we're on our 11th episode, and we've got meat curing up to talk about. The whole thing. We just want to dive right in.
Excellent.
And talk about meat curing to preserve as opposed to just to flavor. Mm-hmm. And versus fermentation. Yeah. I guess fermenting as one aspect of meat curing. Mm-hmm. And so I've got a lot of exciting things to chat about there. Yeah,
it's definitely one area, the curing of meat, where I have not been trained in at all. Mm-hmm. I haven't been trained in any of this whatsoever. But proceeded no less brazenly. And things worked out, fortunately. I think when you learn, especially through like a culinary academic program, but when you learn how to cure from an authority, it's tricky to question that because it's coming from an authority, and usually they vindicate themselves a million other ways because they tell you good and useful things. And I kind of skipped that whole thing. I just had to explore it and figure it out. And
using books.
Using books, definitely, but no individual or group or style other than what I discerned from books and from the smelling of meats with my nose apparatus.
Right, making yourself your own authority a little bit.
A little bit, but yes, so taking seriously my own nose and my own senses. I was thrown back upon my own senses several times. Looking at something, feeling it, smelling it, trying to discern what exactly happens, what exactly changes from a fresh piece of animal flesh to something that now we call cured. Like what just happened? Mm-hmm. Is that discernible? Right. And is it discernible in a way beyond just, well, I followed the recipe, therefore 'tis cured. Mm-hmm. 'Tis it? I don't know about that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
we'll get into all that in just a minute. But before we dive right into all of that, because you just brought up, like, it actually would be good to go into the story of how you learned.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do that.
Yeah.
As we're describing the process itself. The process of you discovering the process. So.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll do that. But before we do that, I have a couple of announcements and housekeeping items that I hope will be interesting to you. And the first one is I wanted to share about our pork shares a little bit because we're kind of wrapping up. In fact, I didn't ask you what you did this morning because I can see for myself there's about 20 bus tubs and Cambros dirty in the sink over there, which he emptied of all of the salted meat that are now hanging beautifully in our shop. But I know that you've spent all morning taking all of those pieces off the salt.
Yeah.
From the pork shares. We're wrapping up our spring Mangalitsa pork share extravaganza that took place, and we won't get back to that until the summer, but we are taking orders now for summer Mangalitsa shares, or it'll be like kind of early fall Mangalitsa pork shares.
Cool.
So there's that. Plus, we are releasing our Gloucester Old Spot pork shares, which will be ready Christmas. They'll be ready for your Christmas celebrations. So we'll start harvesting them in November.
Yeah.
But we're going to take orders now. So start thinking about that and get your reservations in, because there's only 10 of them. And each share is a half a pig. And we'll have all of the information up on our website regarding the pricing and what's included. It's a lot of, it's winter. It'll be winter, so there'll be a lot of cured items, just like there have been for the Mangalitsa's. So you can look at information up actually on farmsteadmeatsmith.com/pork-shares. And we'll have the link in the show notes as well. But those are going to be a hit. And we are actually also going to be doing a little film on both the husbandry, so where they've been raised, the farm, the dairy that's been going into them, and then also the back end, like the products themselves, kind of like we did for the Mangalitsa shares, which is all up on that same webpage too.
Cool.
But there'll be a couple of films kind of highlighting the entire process of what goes into these porks, because we are extremely proud to be highlighting them, showcasing them, processing them. They're, I think you've used the term, the Platonic ideal.
They're the best porks.
Platonic form of pig.
They're so good.
Yeah. From nose to tail. So so there's that you can consider. And actually, and to that end, I have to share this testimonial that came. It blew us away, actually, from a gentleman that purchased the Mangalitsa pork share from us about a month ago.
Yeah, which is no easy thing to take on.
Right.
As you know, if you saw the video of Mangalitsa's that we made, I'm holding up a piece of fat to the screen right now. That's the Mangalitsa pork share times 15.
Yeah, it's just fat, and more fat.
Yeah. No, clearly there's meat. I mean, there's streaks of meat in the bacon, and then an eye in the bacon, in the back bacon, and there's a copa, and there's wonderful sausage. But let it be known that a Mangalitsa is a lard pig, so at least 50% of the carcass, more like 60, 65, and when you get to the blonde Mangalitsa that's 18 months old, maybe 70% of the carcass is fat. Mm-hmm. So it takes a considerable amount of conviction to purchase a half Mangalitsa pig share, especially from crazy people like us who don't trim any of the fat. So we turn it all into yield.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's not something you just, hey, I'm going to get a pork share. It costs more than any other share you will find because the price tag is high, because it did take 2 years to raise these animals. Mm-hmm. And expect it to be, I'm going to have chops and ribs and, the normal porcine harvest that we take for granted as a result of what the grocery store convinces us pork to be.
So he wrote a smashing testimonial, but at the same time, I think what you're saying is we were equally blown away with his courage and his just excitement, and the fact that he wanted to purchase one at all spoke volumes about himself too. To us.
And because for us as producers or as processors, harvesters, I regard the home kitchen as the finish line. That's like the inner sanctum. If we can get our pork into that sacred space, into the domestic altar where people are cooking it and or eating it raw in their kitchen on a semi-regular basis, then that pig has graduated to pork in a more significant sense than just the transition that I brought about by shooting it and scalding, scraping, eviscerating, and splitting, and butchering and salting and
You can lead a
smoking.
horse to water kind of thing.
Yeah, right, yes.
Yeah.
And if they do it again, the frequency with which this pork makes it into people's kitchens is an exact metric of how regenerative small-scale agriculture is, in my opinion. It is not just can you ride, ride the fad and buy the one share and think it's kind of cool, but otherwise kind of burdensome, and you have lots of fat in your freezer now, which I get. Like, that is a real thing. It is a big deal to get this kind of share because you are taking on a culinary revolution in your kitchen at the same time. Unless you're already, cooking with buckets of fat for every meal, shamelessly and unreprovedly, then it's a significant alteration of your cooking habits, in addition to being, the acquisition of lots of porcine food abundance.
So I'll just go into it. This is from Josh, and he has taken privates with us before and public classes, and I think he's even maybe bought a share or two from us before.
Yeah, years ago.
Yeah. So him and his wife Vicky, I'll just read it as quickly as I can. Hi guys, even knowing you, and this came, by the way, what's the term?
Unsolicited?
Unsolicited. It came out of nowhere. Yeah, I was blown away. Okay, hi guys. Even knowing you for 5 or so years, watching video after video that you have produced over and over, butchering pig after pig with you, and even after going through a mangalitsa before.
That's right.
Vicky and I just want to tell you how far you have hit it out of the park this time. The depth of flavor, the variety of the products, everything far surpassed our expectations. And it made me realize how much more there is to be gotten out of a pig. Everything in the share has me inspired to plan out months of soups, breads, larded and bacon-wrapped roasts, and cassoulets. I haven't felt this inspired in a long time. I really wanted to butcher and cure everything myself, because originally he was going to just buy the side of pork and do everything himself, but we ended up not doing that. But I'm really glad that we decided to just do the regular share, because there is no way I would have been able to end up with the pork that was so insanely satisfying on so many levels. I'm particularly impressed with the smoking and how much it increases our enjoyment of the pork. Aside from roasting meats over hardwood charcoal with some cherry or apple wood, we generally don't eat much smoked meat. I've only ever cold smoked something once, one of the pieces of bacon from the last Gloucester Old Spot we got from you. It wasn't a great setup and it didn't create much flavor, so the intensity and sweetness of this smoking in this meat is a revelation. And the sausages are amazing. I didn't know how we were going to feel about 30 plus pounds of paprika flavored sausage.
Yeah.
Since we don't normally use much paprika, but you have done what you set out to do. Make a sausage that we can see eating and enjoying for a long time without getting sick of it. And I remember that was precisely your goal when you were managing the flavoring.
Paprika is an easy one.
Yeah.
It's easy to salt to apply it with a heavy hand to a sausage mix, and even fry up a patty and be like, that's great. I love all that paprika punch. But then you eat it the next day and you just like your skin is starting to pigment yellow and you can't take any more. Paprika is punchy.
Yeah. Okay. So his last little comment. So thank you. I keep experiencing waves of gratitude that people like you are not just keeping alive the arts that give depth and significance to the simplest acts of living, but that you are also so willing and able to spread the message. Josh.
Oh, shucks.
I know. Wasn't that nice?
I didn't know you were going to read that.
Josh, thank you.
It's great.
If you see this, thank you.
It's really not, it's all we do is not mess around too much with the harvest. Yeah. It's really, it's that crazy dichotomy, that apparent contradiction that the simple way, for some reason, is in this economy and in this particular market, in this new agrarian sector, the simple way is strangely the most difficult way because the system is not set up for 100% yield from a lard pig. And it's just so vindicating because that's all I've attempted to do is not, I'm not creating like pâté en croûte and things that I perceive to be really haute cuisine butchery, which is awesome. I think that's beautiful and wonderful. I create slabs of fat for pork's sake, like just slabs of fat. and cure them, a few different ways. But it is just so simple, and it works because the fundamentals are there. We're not having to disguise bad husbandry, or poor feeding, or a bad kill, or long transportation miles. We're not having to disguise those things with excessive processing, excessive flavoring, and kind of the superfluous commodity value of recipe secretism and mystical, kitchen magic. Like, no, it's just, this is a healthy pig that has been bred to produce lots of fat, and it's been fed well and killed well. And if you are willing to engage with it a little bit, it'll be like what Josh says. It'll satisfy you in more ways you anticipated. And I think that's so cool, because this really only makes sense if you want pork or provender of any kind of food that you produce, to not just feed your belly, but to feed your soul. And I know it sounds cliche, but I really look to my food to gratify my sense of aesthetics and harmony and beauty and truth and goodness and integrity, and
that's what integrity means. It's just, it's integral.
Whole. Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. Not disintegrated.
Yeah.
And, so I definitely I don't hold back when it comes to butchering our own pigs, or any pig for that matter. I don't, try to suppress my aesthetic sense because, we're just dealing with food, so this is practical and delicious. Those are our two goals. It's like, no, it can be pretty. And that's not shallow,
Yeah.
And so I agree with him. I find this kind of pork gratifying on many levels.
Yeah.
So even if you're suspicious of, food that feeds the soul, more than just the stomach, food that goes beyond just filling the hole, it's like, well, at best, you're just robbing yourself of more gratification.
Yeah.
Because you have infinite
life.
senses, you have infinite tastes that are more than just, the sensory receptors on your tongue. And gratifying all of those is what food can do. And that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. And then you bring up, there's the whole level of people who come from other countries too, and they experience the products that we have in our, so like, for instance, the prosciutto that you see actually behind us, we've had people from Spain run into it, and they're like, oh, you take me back to my father's house where there's a ham hanging all throughout the year. And that's when we know we've hit one out of the park. Yeah. Or like at the
at Cochon.
At Cochon, yes. Yeah.
At Cochon 5555555. There was I got to do the buffet of back fat.
Right.
And which was all mangalitsa, and I had it 5 ways. I had it as the ground whipped seasoned back fat that you dip crackers in and relish, and then as smoked back fat, and then I had it as just a salt and pepper cured back fat, and then I guess that's 4 ways, and then a paprika and smothered and smoked back fat. So same basic ingredients: salt, fat, and then application of smoke, and then maybe a dusting of paprika. Those are very minor, distinctions, but the range of flavor was amazing. And for me, the most gratifying thing of the night, especially as someone who is generally cynical about all the things, particularly self-adulating chefy parties, was when I had Eastern Europeans, Central Europeans.
It was several couples, right?
And I'm getting to the point where, not to generalize, but to generalize, I can almost pick them out of a crowd now when they come up and they taste my fat. Cause
even before you can hear the accent.
I had, because there's a look on, they recognize it immediately. And it takes a bit of a boldness from people who are not used to eating solid fat. And I can see they have reticence, and they look to me. It's like, okay, well, let me describe to you what this is, just so you know what we're dealing here. Yes, it is solid fat, and you should try it. It really is more mild, so I give my whole spiel in my description of the product. But the Romanians, I had a couple of Romanians and a Latvian come up, and they don't look at me at all. They just grab the fat and they put it in their mouth. They know exactly what it is.
No, they don't know what to do with it.
And they love it. They loved it.
They hung
They're
out there the whole night, right?
Yeah, they kept coming back. They're always the repeats.
Yeah.
And they give you great hints.
Right.
Which is what you were just going to say, right? Yeah, one of them, she told me, we eat this with onion, raw onion.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh.
Of course.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm just an American. I have no history of eating solid back fat beyond my own, self-education in the past several years. And so I don't know these really cool preparations like raw onion with solid cured back fat. Yeah. Of course, brilliant. Yeah. I know. Yeah. And so at any event I go to, even at when I used to work at farmers markets or any party I bring my prosciutto to, if there's a Spanish person there, that is always the most gratifying thing to me, is if I can get those people to remember their homes,
right,
and how again this kind of pork, this kind of provender worked in the domestic on the domestic scale, in that on that domestic altar.
Yeah,
that is just so inspiring.
Yeah, and it's vindicating of all the work that we've put into it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would, and for better or worse, maybe for worse, I receive more gratification from someone who has grown up eating this back fat than I would from even a professional charcutier, in America, or professional curer. I want to please the people who represent the ontological reality of that thing. Yeah. Which to me, again, it's in the life of ordinary people, ordinary kitchens, ordinary pigs, daily fare. Yeah. This is what we eat daily. This is how we survive winter. It's not just the luxury of a very, successful society, which is great. But I think going back to its roots, that is so gratifying.
Yeah. Cool.
Anyway.
So you can order one of these very special shares, either the Mangalitsa or the Gloucester Old Spot, which is maybe more distinctly British than Eastern European in how we've crafted that share. And we'll go into that at another time. But
I have had British people come to our class from the East Coast.
Right.
We're on the West Coast, everybody.
Okay.
We're in the Pacific Northwest. They came from the East Coast to our class solely because what caught their attention, the hook and the deciding factor, was the scalding and the scrape.
Oh, right.
Remember that couple? They were a British couple.
Yes.
They I think they'd been in the States for about 8 years, and working here. And they missed their cracklin. They missed their crispy pigskin on their roasts, which is standard even in more, large-scale production in England. They still have the crispy pigskin. And so they didn't even have, plans to become farmers or to harvest their own pigs. It was out of devotion to the food value and the flavor of pig skin that they came to our class across the country. Yeah. And they had a great time. And it was so fun to have them, because of that kind of passion, again, for their home and what they ate there and how monumental, what an icon pigskin was of their home food.
So that's a great segue, actually, because I was going to bring up classes. We just got through last weekend the first of our Spring Family Pig classes, which is a 3-day all-out extravaganza. I mean, again, I don't want to pat ourselves too much on the back, because really the most impressive part of the class is the endurance that our students have to make it through 9 to 5, 3 days in a row.
It does take endurance, which is why it was nice we had a couple Marines in the class.
That's true.
And even a few other, vets.
There was an Army vet there. Yeah.
It was great. And so they know endurance.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the class a little bit, because it was fantastic. We haven't had a class of that size. I mean, it sold out in a while.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And I love actually mentioning the spectrum of people that were there, because it helps, I think, set the stage for really how these classes bring people together. Yeah. And there was one Australian man who
Right.
actually he's a second Australian gentleman that we've had in our classes before.
Oh,
So I'm
cool.
growing a fondness for Australian people. There was a gentleman from South Dakota.
Yep.
He was the Army vet.
Air Force.
Oh, Air Force. You're right.
Yep.
You're right. Okay. And he was a character. And then he's now a good friend, I think.
Yeah.
And then a couple from Northern California, a gentleman from Southern California. There was, help me out here,
And then a couple from Denver.
right? And he was a Marine.
Yeah.
And they were getting ready to start their family. She was pregnant.
That's right.
So
with their first.
we rubbed
Yeah.
bellies a little bit. And then
And then where
a
was...
gentleman from Spokane.
That's right.
And
Where was Kevin from?
he was from Southern California.
Okay. Yeah.
And that might have been it, I think. Yeah.
And Kentucky.
Oh, yes. There was a gentleman from Kentucky.
Yes.
Yep. So we had the South represented. We had the Midwest. And
Sierra Nevadas.
middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, so the whole country. And it was a great, great class. And it helped that spring is in full force here now. The apple blossoms were out. And it was just gorgeous. And we had a full sunny day, that slaughter day. And
Yeah.
they were so into it, and they developed their own kind of camaraderie and exchanging email addresses afterward. And
Which is really common. That's why we started the Meatsmith Table Facebook group.
right, so they have access to that now.
So people can stay connected after the class. Because there's no, especially for the couple that's going home to Denver, their humidity is roughly 0%.
Right.
Which is totally different from where we are and different from the guy in Kentucky. And we've had quite a few people now from Colorado, from the South. And in those places, if you're going to be curing in a way that is not dependent upon importing the Mediterranean climate into your shop or your house in the form of temperature and humidity controlled cabinets, then it's good to hook up with other people to figure out how best to make bacon in 95% humidity and 84 degrees, like in Kentucky it can be sometimes, or in 92 degrees and 2% humidity, because bacon is going to cure very differently in those places.
Right.
And part of the joy and the what I try to communicate in the class are the basics, the fundamentals of pig to pork, salt, smoke, and the effects those things have on each other, and how you can then have a prowess knowing those interactions and then being able to tailor them to your region without being dependent upon a cabinet with controlled humidity and temperature, because that's so much more valuable than a list of recipes which might not work in your place.
Right.
Unless you do have want to do the $3,000 for the curing cabinet. Then follow all the Italian recipes you can find.
Yeah, and we'll talk actually more about the cabinet thing here in just a minute. But I wanted to mention we have just released our fall classes. So if you're interested in coming to one of these family pig events, they're up on the website. You can find it at farmsteadmeatsmith.com/upcoming-classes. And it's the family pig event. And they're wide open right now. So we're just releasing them.
Yeah.
There's going to be one in October and one in November. And so you'll get kind of the seasonality of how we try to start cures at that time. And we'll talk all about it there.
And we get to cover husbandry too a little bit, because we are raising these pigs.
We're not.
For these classes?
Oh, wait, are we? Yes, we
For
are.
the
You're right.
classes,
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
We're raising them.
Yeah.
And so you can see the simple setup, which we have here, which, do not be deceived. It's not an extravagant porcine palace. It's a very simple, we have 2.5 acres, and I'm not a full-time farmer. So, but I have very high standards for how my pigs are to be raised and the impact they will have on the land. And so trying to balance all of those with the cherry on top of having no time to farm anything. And we've hit on a good little system that I think people will find beneficial.
Yeah. We're constantly polishing that rock.
Yeah.
And trying to improve it, make it work better for us, better for the customers, better for everyone involved, the pigs.
Yeah, because no matter how busy we get, the given is that we must always have pigs on the property.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't seem fully alive.
Yeah, we've never even considered not
Unless
raising
we have them.
pigs
Yeah.
every year.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, well let's dive into the content then now. We started hinting at it already anyway with the cabinets and everything, so let's make sure we hit that.
Getting ready for the content.
That's his new favorite beer too, by the way. Cochon.
Oh, it's pretty good.
We haven't been paid to
No.
advertise this, but it is his new favorite right now.
It's made by a microbrew in Bellingham, I think. Yep, Bellingham. Cochon. And they put it in a can, and it's actually quite mild. You could actually drink it in the summer and not pucker your lips and parch your throat with an overambitious use of hops. One could say an undiscerning use of hops. They've actually created a balanced summer beer. Is what I'm trying to say.
We've gone into
it's their premium lager in a can. It's just great. I love it.
We love to rag on Pacific Northwest beer, so
yeah,
I'll stop doing that. But this is a good one that we enjoy.
Yeah, they nailed it.
Okay, so I wanted to, I guess, break it down. Maybe three. Well, there's curing. We'll talk about that, and then we'll talk maybe about at the very end any controversy that people have developed in their minds over this, and it doesn't need to be that way, of course.
Yeah.
But I want to dispel some of that at the very end. But the curing itself kind of, for me, divides into two categories mainly, and then a third kind of detail that we need to cover too. And the first is whole muscle curing. Mm-hmm. And I'll let you talk about what that is. Yeah. And then fermentation, which is different than whole muscle curing. And then interspersed in, talking about what each of those are, we need to hit what the nitrate, what those are, and maybe saltpeter too. Yeah. So I'll just kind of let you have at it, and then and I'll pretend like I'm an eager student.
I hope you don't have to pretend to.
And because I've listened to his bacon spiel. I call it the bacon spiel. So many times. And every time it comes out a little bit different. No, it's great. And it's always fascinating where it takes us, actually. Yeah. It can take us in several different ways. Bacon it's about life.
It is it's a polyvalenced reality.
Yeah, it can take you way into like philosophy even. So we'll see if we go there. But the way you make your bacon, it stems from a broader worldview, we'll say, too.
It does.
So, I know that fly is buzzing around here.
But we're heading into fly season, which is something we should remember to talk about.
Okay, I'll write that down. Fly season.
Yeah, fly management. That's a big one.
Okay, so...
And seasonality, yeah. But
Brandon, what is whole muscle curing?
So that is one of the main categories that I have arrived at in my head, and you'll find this in a lot of good books on curing, of which there is a small number, but they're growing. There's whole muscle curing, there is fermenting, and then fatting is one that I would add. And the reason the things that all of those three categories, those methods achieve, they achieve preservation. And unfortunately, most cured meat in America is not cured so as to preserve it. In fact, one of the things that you tend to have to prove to the inspection agencies, whether that be county health departments or even the USDA, is that you are not curing. You have not curing for preservation. You have no pretense towards making your bacon keep until the end of the cosmos. In fact, you have a very rigid and well-defined use-by date in your HACCP, in the plan that you create for the making of that product. So we can preface all of this by saying that one thing, that difference that we regard curing as preservation, that changes everything. Mm-hmm. So
preservation either by fatting, fermenting, or whole muscle curing.
Right. Yep. I mean, and
we'll talk about fatting another time. But
so to me, that is bacon with integrity, and this might be, a silly philosophical prejudice of my own, which it most definitely is.
What's happening?
We're having sound. It sounds like my phone.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
Siri.
You don't have an alarm set for 2.
Well, thank God.
We're thinking maybe our recording is stopped recording or something, but
how do we tell Siri to stop spying on us? Okay, but that really is very distinct. The notion that you would cure to preserve. So no other cookbook that I have found, let's see, can I really say that? Except for ones written in the 19th century, would consider preservation to be part of curing. And for me, it's my aesthetic, it's my philosophy, it's my desire for the sublime. I think that if something could be super tasty and never rot, that's like almost a magic thing. That defies the boundaries of terrestrial expectation. Like, that's just a little too good to be true to me. And not only can you hold both of those things at once, extravagant flavor and just thrift, but they actually feed each other. So like the longer you let your ham hang in your kitchen, the better it will taste. And that is a pattern that echoes all across phenomenological reality, as we perceive things. And that's a powerful pattern. And to me, that's what bacon can be. That's what cured meat can be. So I'm always trying to ride that line. So what that means, though, is that when I'm curing something, I have more goals than just, I want to nail the flavor. That is definitely like number one goal.
Yeah.
My other number one goal is that it preserve. And I hold them in the exact same tenacity.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the conflict that makes it really challenging and super rewarding when you get it. And it also, this is my contention, it actually leaves a crack in the door for serendipity, for things to go better, much better than you expected them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is going to color everything we say for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, that's like a preface.
Yeah, curing for preservation. And that means that a lot of what we'll say in this is going to be absolutely anathematized by the dominant curing discourse in America. And that's not because I'm opposed to it, or they're even necessarily opposed to me, but it's also that they are, most of the books have, one of their primary goals is liability. And also telling people how to cure for resale.
Right.
And so that's a completely different thing. If you want to start a charcuterie where you're actually buying pork and then curing it and selling it, that's a whole different conversation. That is much more complex. But I don't want anyone to think that I'm not arrogant enough to assume that the way that you unite curing and preservation should not also make it into the retail end, because I do think it should. And I think the best of the best that is produced in the world also meets both of those ends. And good examples of that would be, the jamón ibérico, and I don't actually know how to say that, but the Spanish ham is cured very traditionally, very old school, and cured and preserved. It keeps for well over 3 years. In fact, sometimes they don't even sell it until it's at that mark. And similarly, like Salami Vialese is, I think, a place in New York where they do things the old way.
Right. But they had to go through
major hoops.
A lot of red tape.
Very interesting story.
So it's not an easy thing to do in this country, at least. I don't know if other countries, maybe they don't have the cultural hoops to just jump through, but...
So maybe where this conversation would have the most import is, again, on the domestic scale, because that's what
I was thinking when I was kind of crafting what we talk about. And it's not that we can't talk about policy, but it just that you have to know ahead of time what you're getting into. Yeah. If you're going to try to sell this kind of product, retail at least. I think of like the home cured ham
Or like the home cured back fat from the Latvian kitchen, you know.
Yeah.
I think of those as the North Star. That's the Platonic form.
Yeah.
That's what we should pursue.
Uh-huh.
That's the goal. So
Yeah.
this episode will probably be more about defining that
Yeah.
perfection of curative.
Well, yeah,
and then,
yeah.
you know, hopefully the retail and the policy end
Yeah.
catches up, you know.
Yeah, and you're going to have to be committed anyway. Before you dive into the murky waters of trying to sell this, make sure you really love it first and be dedicated to it, because you're going to need to be. And so that's why I think it'd be great to just talk about what it is and why it far surpasses its competition, and get people, and I want to get people excited to just dive in and make it in their own homes first.
Yeah.
And then like eventually, you know, some people will sell it.
Yeah.
But that's got to be number one.
Yeah.
So how do you make bacon?
Okay, yes. So actually talk about a thing that's concrete.
Yeah, give us your bacon.
That's the thing about bacon and all of these cures. They did not originate in test kitchens made by chefs in lab coats with beakers and isolated nitrite. That is not where these came from. They came from the home kitchen, usually from the women, the housewives. The men would, you know, knock the pig, do the kill, and there's an army of women and children and some men, you know, pulling off whole pieces of meat and putting it on the salt, and like in grandma's special salting drawer.
Yeah.
So these are traditions that are held and passed down multi-generationally. That's a multisyllabic word, but and so all that to say, the proper context for bacon is the home.
Yeah.
You are the one with the prowess to make it, because that is where it originated from. So, how do you make it? Bacon falls in the category of whole muscle cures. And whole muscle cure is a hunk of meat that you cut off an animal and put salt on it, and then rinse the salt off and dry it and hang it, and or smoke, and then smoke it and then hang it some more. So that's a whole muscle cure. And examples of hunks that you might cut off of an animal would be the back leg, the front leg, the middle part, the
solid
stuff
masses.
around, the back. The middle part we have come, and the back in the English language we have come to call bacon. And you take the fresh flesh, either still warm with body temperature, or after being chilled in a refrigerator, or even after having been frozen. So you can dry cure frozen meat after you thaw it out. You can dry cure fresh meat and even hot meat. Not hot as in cooked, but, recently living.
Just warm, yeah.
Retaining the thermal mass of life and of metabolism. So you take off a hunk, and in the case of bacon in America, that means the belly. And you apply salt. And what the salt does is remove and bind water, because water is not the agent, but the catalyst of spoilage. It's like the environment. Available water that is unbound, that is puddled, that is in a little droplet, that is available to bacterial diluents, which is when bacteria get together and they have a party and they proliferate and they start eating proteins and sugars and farting and pooping toxins and nasty things and slime, and otherwise known as spoilage, and they cause spoilage. And so when you apply salt to meat, you are removing the water, it'll drain off the meat, but you're also binding the water. So what water remains, little salt ions will occupy, as it were, those water molecules and make them unavailable. They're bound. They're not accessible to other bacteria. And I don't exactly know how that works. But, I mean, that is what osmosis is, and the cell walls are diffusive, so it allows the water to leave the cell walls of the meat and come in contact with the salt, because it seeks a balance with the salt, so it actually travels to the salt, which is crazy. And we definitely call that diffusion, but it's actually just magic, because that's a miracle to me that happens at all. We can describe it,
Yeah.
but then that's where our knowledge ends.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what makes bacon bacon in my mind. That gives it the salty flavor because the water is carrying salt back into the meat. And then it's also what cures it because it's binding the water and removing it. And so if the bacon were to go bad, it would be through a bacterial invasion and colonization. Bacteria would get on there and multiply and rot the meat. And some of those bacteria would be pathogens, which are not so good for humanogens, and they can make you real sick. And the salt removes and binds that water, making it unavailable. So,
well, and then talk about the bacterial presence, because it's not like this is a completely sterile piece of flesh to begin with. There's bacteria inherent on there, and so you are not trying to create a sterile environment. You're just creating an environment, and it's just like cheese or anything else, where you are trying to encourage the good guys, or is that more fermentation?
that's more fermentation, but
Okay.
it still applies. So bacon falls under the heading of the whole muscle cures
Right.
because it is cured, effectively preserved, and flavored by drying, removing and binding water, not fermentation.
Right.
So it is not dependent upon bacteria eating sugar and creating acid to preserve it. It's not dependent upon that. And so bacterial action on bacon would be incidental, and it would only be on the surface.
Right. Okay.
Because, bacon is flesh, and it is muscle, skeletal muscle, and subcutaneous fat, and intramuscular fat, and it's not that innard is not host to bacteria unless the pig has an infection.
Right. Okay.
So there's only bacteria on the surface, which happens to be the surface to which you are applying your cure, your dry salt rub, or even your brine. And so it's not a Trojan horse
Right.
occupied by nefarious Greeks that are going to jump out the moment you turn your back and cause your bacon to spoil and then go found the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
So with all of its draconian food laws. So it's, bacteria plays an incidental role.
Yeah.
It's incidental.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. It's not instrumental in the curing of the bacon. So when I give people a bacon recipe, and I've got a couple ways to do it, I guess what I'm trying to communicate is that the basic thing is apply salt to fresh meat. And then the question becomes, how do you know when enough of that osmosis diffusion business has happened, enough water has been removed and bound for the bacon to be preserved?
Right. How do you know it's done?
It's done. How do you know it's cured?
Right.
Because again, what I'm intending that with the bacon, you would rinse it, and we're just taking bacon as the example, but this applies to guanciale, pancetta, lomo, lonzo, ham, jamon, prosciutto, every whole muscle cure. Brisket is a whole muscle cure. I'm assuming that after you rinse off the salt, because you have determined that the curing is done, that you're going to hang it in your kitchen indefinitely. And indefinitely meaning that it could hang until the end of the cosmos and it will never spoil. And any reason that you would take it down before then is not a matter of do or die food safety, but of personal preference. How do you like your bacon? The longer it hangs, the stiffer and harder it will become until you have wood and you're carving off thin little shavings or like grating your bacon on a salad. Like it'll go that far. And in drier climates, it'll go there much quickly. In humid climates, it'll take a little longer. Usually when people think of breakfast bacon, which is very floppy and moist, right? Each individual slice that fries up nicely and isn't chewy, that's a relatively young bacon. And that's great. You rinse it, dry it, and hang it for, in our climate, about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And that's when it's at that perfect texture for us. And again, that is personal taste. It could just keep hanging. It will not rot.
Yeah.
So how do you know when you've gotten it to that point? How do you know when it is cured? And one way I like to tell people to do it is a way that the intent is to train your senses to recognize curitude, when it is all the way cured. And it usually only takes about 4 days with the standard belly. And I say get a tabula rasa.
I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, sorry.
That's pretty good.
You have to reach sometimes.
Yeah.
A blank tub,
Right.
an empty food tub. And, I use bus tubs.
Yeah.
I mean,
I wish we could have like the wooden
Uh-huh.
bowls that, British grandmothers used to have probably, but food grade plastic is what we've
homogeneous,
got.
hewn out of an oak log.
Right. Yeah.
With drain holes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So someday.
Yeah.
Or like built into a stone house. There are houses that were built
No way.
in the 7th century. Stone houses up on the hills in Yorkshire,
Whoa.
where built into the home was their stone slab bacon
Oh my gosh.
carrying
Wow.
apparatus, which is just one gigantic stone with
Wow.
a small trough chiseled out of it and a drain.
Oh, how fun. That would be so
And it's
amazing.
there. It's part of the
Yeah.
bloody building.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
not going anywhere.
How inspiring that
That's
would
where
be.
you salt your
Yeah.
bacon. So
Yeah.
that's how old bacon is. And bacon is distinctly British. Or, it's English, which is
Yeah,
kind of our
the
parent.
word is
Our parent
even-
culture is
Yeah.
England. Not least because of the language. And bacon is an English word. We tend to import lots of Italian ones, probably because of Italian immigrants, into America, bringing their wonderful salami, prosciutto, pancetta, l'uomo, l'onzo, that's all Italian. Bacon.
Bacon is British.
Bacon is British. That's an
Yep.
English word. So anyway, the way I like to tell people to train their senses to detect curitute, and you can do this with any fresh or previously frozen piece of pork flesh. You can do this with a pork chop.
That's right.
You can do this with anything. There's nothing on a pig that you're not supposed to cure. That is unallowed. Because meat is meat, water is water, salt is salt. Diffusion and osmosis are diffusion and osmosis, which are magic. But you can take a piece of belly, put some salt in the bottom of your tub, put the belly on top of the salt, put some salt on the top of the belly. And, I would say don't put too much. That's as much guidance as I'll give you. And just a little bit, a night
Come
like...
to a class and you can see how much he
It's
sprinkles.
it actually doesn't matter. I mean, you're developing your sense. And I guess the point of this is I'm assuming you want to have curing prowess, not just successful bacon your first time. I'm assuming that you want to be docile to what the process of integrity will yield rather than the recipe will gratify you with. So this is assuming you want to go down the bacon journey. You want to take the road less traveled by and create bacon that's going to be too salty. You're not going to like it a few times. Maybe even when you nail the recipe, it's still something you're going to have to get used to in terms of flavor because, So this is assuming that you kind of want to go the long road. You want to know why bacon, not just like how to make bacon.
Yeah.
Which will confer upon you a prowess, So here's the prowess developing thing. Salt on the bottom of the tub, put the bacon down, salt on the top of the bacon. And think of like a heavy spice rub on a steak.
Yeah.
And put the tub in the fridge. And then the next day, get your tub out of the fridge. You'll notice that water will have come out of the meat and puddled in the bottom of the tub. Pour out that meat. And if you want, or that water, sorry, if you want to be kind of specific about it, you could even pour it into a mason jar and measure the quantity of that water. I have never done that, but I think that would be kind of a cool thing. And then reapply salt where you see it has dissolved from the previous day's application. And if you're using really fine salt, it will all have dissolved. If you're using really coarse salt, some will still remain in the crystallized form sitting on the meat. So don't add more salt to that spot, is what I'm saying. Because the easiest thing to do when you make bacon is to oversalt it. So you come back the next day, you drain that liquid, you put the belly back in, you put it back in the fridge. You do the same thing on day 3. And then do the same thing on day 4. And you keep noting the quantity of water that you're pouring off. And it will gradually reduce because the bacon has a finite quantity of water that is becoming gradually accessible to the diffusion and osmosis of the salt. And eventually you'll get to no water, but if you take it all the way to that point where you're not extracting any more brine from the meat or any more meat juice, then you will have oversalted the bacon for your own taste. I almost guarantee it. And so track that liquid and just note the reduction. And I would say if you're doing a standard pork belly, it's around day 4. And I can't give you an exact number because all bellies are different. All genetics from pig to pig are different. And the feed is different. And all of those things have a decisive effect on how much water is in the meat. So there is really no such thing as a bacon recipe. I can give you a bacon method, that you can then take. And the best thing I can give you is the ability to discern curedness, when it is cured. And so I would say when you're just getting like a couple tablespoons off of the bacon, and that's usually around day 4, and rinse off all the salt. You don't want any standing on the surface of the bacon. You've decided it's done. Dry it and hang it. And there's a couple other signs that you might look for. There's the reduction in the liquid, and the bacon will also be have less of the floppitude of freshness. So fresh meat is really floppy. It's so floppy. It's got a lot of give. It's rollable. You can roll it up in a tight roll pretty effortlessly because it is so pliable and floppy. As it cures, it will stiffen. As you remove more and more water from the meat, it will gain a little bit of rigidity. I won't say it will become stiff, but it'll be more inclined to bend than roll. But really, these are just things you need to open your senses to. Handle the bacon, feel it, smell it, look at it. The meat will get darker as it cures. That's another thing. The pigment of the flesh will darken a little bit. And I should also say that, this simple recipe, these signs will all be thrown off if you use tormented pork. Because pork from the grocery store or of lesser quality is pumped full of feed that chemically enhances the water holding capacity of the pork. And since curing is water holding management, you're just, all bets are off. You have no idea how much of that chemical the pig ate in its diet.
Interesting.
And then even at the butchery and at the butchery stage of pork like that, they're injecting it with polyphosphates to plump it up and to add more water weight.
Whoa.
So again, you've got, that'll skew your water measurements, and the pig will be going rancid immediately when it's exposed to oxygen. So the meat will not be getting darker. It will be becoming more and more pale and bitter and yellow. It'll all turn gray on you. So there's just all of this, again, presumes, just like curing for preservation, I should say, the other axiom here is that you have good ordinary pork, perfect pork.
Healthy pork.
Healthy, a pig that is fed well and killed well. Because, this is the axiom. Really, truly, the most decisive ingredients in every curing recipe are the husbandry and the harvest. What the pig was fed, how it was killed and harvested. That's it. If you get those things right, this simple bacon recipe that I'm giving you will create extravagantly delicious bacon. If not, that's when the recipes come in. The complex recipes with esoteric ingredients and dire warnings about food poisoning, because the other thing about that pork is that it is dirty. It's dirty, like even on an internal metabolical level, because the pig may have been fed antibiotics as a ration. I'm not necessarily opposed to antibiotics to save a pig's life. Good grief. Don't lose that harvest if your pig is going down because they got a cut.
Yeah.
Just give them a shot, and bring them back, and that'll make good bacon, in my opinion.
And put the harvest off maybe a little while longer.
Yeah. Follow the directions for the antibiotic. And even if they get a worm load, I think that rather than lose your pig, worm them.
Especially if you're on a small scale homestead, you can't afford to lose a whole pig.
No, don't beat yourself up about that. And then just fix your husbandry practices to mitigate worm loads, right? Anyway, but again, if you go with the tormented pork, that meat is dirty.
On the inside, it's not just the surface thing that you have to worry about.
Right.
Anymore.
So they've been consuming toxicity. Some of those antibiotics, like components of them, are fat soluble. And so they make the fat bitter and gross. Usually the protein ration in the soy is in the feed is based on soy, which has been radiated, has been cooked. And so those oils have been exposed to oxygen for a while. Who knows? They're grown in China and shipped over to, wherever they were fed to the pig. And so the pig is eating lots of rancid oils, which make that fat bitter, which also makes the lean go rancid quicker, which means that your color metric that I mentioned, discerning the darkening of the color, you don't have that anymore with a tormented pig. And then just the sheer number of locations that the flesh has been through makes it dirty.
Yeah.
It was probably slaughtered and cut up in one place, one humongous building, but then shipped to how many, refrigerated trucks, refrigerated warehouses before it makes it to the retailer, and then it makes it into your bag and then into your kitchen. I can't tell you how, I take it for granted every time. I kill a pig in my backyard, and then I drag it to my truck, and I put its bellies in my butcher shop, which is sometimes 15 feet away. So less than 1 food mile by a lot. And it's just, there's so much more control. But, so all of that to say, start with good pork, and this simple bacon recipe, which is taking me way too long to communicate, will work beautifully. So you've decided we've reached a good degree of rigidity. There's just a little bit of water left in the tub, not a lot. And the meat is darkening. The pigment is changing. So you rinse off the salt with some tepid water, and I'd say, scrub the belly a little bit, jostle it, and you might lose some of the rigidity as you're doing that. It's going to get a little floppy again, and that's fine. But you really want to get the salt off the surface of the meat, and hang it up, and let it hang for a couple weeks. And you could, after it's hung for a day or two, and you see that the surface is dry, not moist, but dry, then you can cold smoke it, which is to say you're not cooking it with the smoke. It's just smoke lazily wafting around the meat without cooking it. So it's a cool smoke, not a heat source. The meat is still raw, in other words. And then hang it back in your kitchen. And it's best to do this when there are no flies around. So winter months, in the northern hemisphere, do that and when it's cold. And then you won't even have to think about flies. And slice it and try it. And see what you think. You're probably going to think it's too salty. And you might be right, because the first thing everybody does is oversalt, because you heed the little devil on your shoulder telling you to just keep it on the salt one more day. Just add a little more salt. Just to belt and braces, make sure it's safe. But the thing about that little devil is that it's not based on knowledge. It's good to interrogate that little devil as to why, what will go wrong. Exactly, because you need a definition, because turns out spoilage is just not an abstract, magical curse that happens to your bacon. It's actually a biological thing that will happen. So, which means you can understand it, and you can avoid it. And so interrogate it. And what does spoilage mean exactly? Ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of hanging this in my kitchen? And it's not enough to say, well, food poisoning. Well, what food poisoning? Exactly, please. Well, botulism. Well, what is botulism? Because botulism is not a euphemism for food poisoning. It's not a generalized term for food poisoning at all. Botulism is a very... Oh, hi.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Speaking of botulism.
Oh, Grandma Tia had some apples for you guys for snack.
Okay.
Can you go do that? Okay, that's enough.
You
Please.
just can't resist. God. Oh, God.
The wine glasses.
Door slamming. Okay. So what is botulism? Botulism is the result of the ingestion of the botulate toxin that is produced by a spore that comes from the Clostridium botulinum bacteria. Under what conditions is that toxin produced? And it's oxygen-free conditions where there is no oxygen in anaerobic condition. And so that's really, theoretically possible in salami, which we'll talk about, and in insufficiently canned things, because that's an anaerobic environment. So when it comes to whole muscle cures like bacon, botulism just is really not possible unless you are subjecting the whole muscle to an anaerobic environment. That's the only way you could achieve that. So if you're vacuum sealing it, and even if you're vacuum sealing it, there's salt in there, usually, if you're following the, what do they call it, the EQ cure method, whereby you measure out exactly 2% of salt by weight, and then you ensure that every grain is touching the meat, and then you vacuum seal that or put it in a very tight-fitting Ziploc bag. You're ensuring that the bacon will never have more than 2% salt. You're also salting it to the minimum of what is required to cure it and taste good. 2% salt by weight happens to be what cures meat and what tastes good. And that's kind of a serendipitous correlation, and probably not without biological justification, actually. But what am I saying that for? Oh yeah, so even in a Ziploc bag, there's going to be salt, and that will keep the pH real low and the water bound, even the brine that is created. Because the other thing that Clostridium botulinum needs is free water and a high pH. So alkalinity, it can't handle an acidic environment.
So that's why, actually, to be extra thorough and consistent in our approach, we don't use the bag.
Yeah, we don't.
We keep things in the open air in a bus tub.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's a good guideline that I operate by is
erring on the side of air.
Yeah, air on airflow.
Yeah.
And my smoker even incorporates that too, because that's another potential place for an anaerobic environment. And so the whole lower elevation of my smoker, so the first 1.5 or 2 feet of the walls of my smoker is screen. It's permeable. It allows airflow. And so, excuse me. It's what, that airflow coming into my smoker from that bottom half of the walls is what provides the oxygen for the combustion that is happening in the same chamber as the meat.
Right.
So insofar as you're achieving combustion, which is the same as smoke generation, insofar as you're creating smoke in the same place that is trapping the smoke and holding the meat, there's a possibility of the anaerobic environment because the fire could consume the oxygen in that space. And so I like to have a heavily vented smokehouse. And it's just along the bottom half. So it still traps the smoke plenty efficiently. And I get a good dark smoke, after just 2 days of smoking. So that's the whole oxygen thing. All that to say, interrogate your fears.
Yeah.
Because it is not scientific. It is bad food science to err on the side of draconian safety. Just don't err.
Right.
Just define,
it's a really
and
good
figure
point.
it out.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that think, this type of curing is throwing off science or like for the sake of aesthetics or something, or, like somehow we're just kind of going for it and to hell with, food safety or as if we would even put our families at danger.
Right.
But
I feed this bacon to my babies.
Yeah. So we're going to follow the science. And actually, when you do follow the science and given the axioms of good, healthy pork and common sense, then science will actually vindicate this approach.
Right. Well, and it so happens that to be really scientific in your approach for making bacon, you need to consider all of the data, because what science needs to do first is describe something before it dares to make prescriptions. And far too often, and it's because of liability, so I get it, but cookbooks written in America on meat curing, they kind of skip all the data. And the particular data that they skip is history.
Right.
That's data.
That's part of data.
You need to describe the phenomena first. And the phenomena is people curing meat. And so go figure out how they've been doing it, from old recipes and the success thereof. What did make people sick traditionally and how did they avoid it? Because that's the phenomena you're describing. So describe it really specifically, and then make your theories or your prescriptions.
Can you give us examples of when things have gone wrong, and there's just been a few recorded ones, and I think the CDC maybe, or anecdotes that we've read, but the introduction of plastic, for instance, which is relatively recent, that that can be linked to botulism.
Yeah, so there's so many ways to look it up, but because again, there's many versions of food poisoning. Botulism is one.
Right.
There's also, you could have Salmonella, Listeria, and E. coli infect things,
they all
or be present on the
differently.
meat. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're all different. Generally, though, they all need water. They all do not relish a low pH. They do not like acidity.
Okay.
And they all need water. And the thing about salt is that it removes and binds water. And the thing about cold smoking is it lowers the pH on the surface of the meat. But again, those bacterial things, they are just so unlikely on whole muscle cures. Because if those bacteria would be present, which is very likely that they are indeed present, they will only be on the surface, which is the plane. They're not residing in the flesh, right? Yeah. Like the Greeks and the Trojan horse.
Yeah.
So the surface is precisely the thing to which you are applying the water-binding salt and smoke, acidifying smoke. So they don't like that. What was I saying? Oh, examples. So it depends on which one you want to look up. Like botulism, it's really tricky, for example, to find an example of botulism poisoning by salami. Okay. Defined as a sausage, ground meat, seasoned, salted, stuffed into a casing, and then hung to dry for a while, and then eaten raw. And your definition is very important. And I haven't found one yet that fits botulism in a salami. So actually, I would be interested to know if someone could find that one. The records that I could find online did not have that. It's usually poor canning and the introduction of plastics to Inuit curing methods. Because, it's one thing to bury a bunch of cliff-dwelling seabirds in a burlap sack and let them rot and then eat the flesh raw, which is a thing. It's entirely another thing to bury them in a trash bag.
Yeah.
Because, again, you're creating that anaerobic environment, completely airtight. And then that gives you the conditions for botulism to be created. And then, like bad canning, hence pressure cookers. And I think someone needs to write a history of botulism. I think that'd be incredibly interesting because I'm sure it's had selective biological impact and definitely with food policy. The largest, I guess, societal impact it made was when canning started to happen in industrialized places, when we started to can food. And there were lots of cases of botulism because they had to learn that, boiling is not enough. Right. That does not kill the spore. Botulism was discovered by a guy who heroically, this I think was in the 1860s, but it's been a while, so I might have that wrong. I know it was the 19th century. But a bunch of minstrels, but they weren't even called minstrels in the 19th century, so musicians were at a wedding. And one of the first cases of botulism was not salami, but from a blood-filled stomach. Because, you can catch the blood of a pig and fill its tummy with oats and apples and onions and blood, and then poach it gently. And there's the problem, because you think of blood, it cooks at the temperature, basically, that eggs cook, which is very low, way below boiling. And so when you do that, and then there's also this thing when you cook blood is to not overcook it because it'll burst. And so I just picture, the cook for that wedding not wanting to burst the pig stomach and undercooking it, and the musicians ate it, and
Well, and then didn't
they
it
got
kind
botulism.
of sit for a while too? That was part of it.
Something, yeah, I
Enough
can't
time
remember.
had gone by. It wasn't like the fresh product that it should have been.
Yeah, it was probably undersalted and undercooked.
Yeah.
Because if it was undercooked, there would be free water in there. Because the thing about blood is when you cook it, it coagulates like pudding. It does what eggs do. They go solid, which is to say, bind all the water. But blood unbound, is just incredibly perishable. It's blood soluble nutrients. So all the bacteria in the cosmos want to get in on that.
Yeah.
And then the other one was an undercooked ham.
Okay.
So, and that was one that was smoked.
Oh.
Yeah. So probably smoked in an anaerobic environment, and then not really cooked. It could have been just raw and cured and relatively fresh, meaning pretty close to the kill. And those were the first cases that gave the impetus for the discovery of botulism. And the scientist that named it, I think, he actually contracted it himself and gave it to his dog in the name of science.
Wow.
And they survived, but it's a neurotoxin, so it can kill you, very,
Wow.
very much kill you, and or mess you up in a permanent manner. So, but he went through it, and they're the ones that named it botulus.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you know why?
Yeah, because they like Latin names for diseases. That's the thing, particularly in the 19th century. Not because the Romans called sausage botulus, in the sense that, so the toxic food poisoning connotations were only applied to that word in the 19th century.
To botulism.
Yeah. The Roman legions marched across the Mediterranean and all over northern Africa with salami, not with little death sticks called botulism. You know what I mean? That botulus was their word for.
Right. Yeah.
If it wasn't, sal, it was botulus. Meat and to perform. So it acquired its negative connotations in the 19th century.
Right.
Because I hate it when I read authors in cookbooks saying, the Romans used to call it botulus. It's like, well, yeah, because that was their word for sausage, not food poisoning.
Right.
Because you don't walk around with food poisoning sticks. Like, ugh. I know, sorry. It's just so precise.
Well, yeah, we've heard a number of these silly kind of offhand remarks that are they have this hubris in them from American authors about other cultures, from mainstream, like the biggest names in curing in the industry, kind of in an offhand way dismiss some of the peasant wisdom, or at least the old world wisdom that still exists in other countries, just de facto. Like, well, the Italians, we've read this, the Italians didn't admit to using nitrate in their salami. This was, I won't give the name, but the author, an American author, wrote this about the Italians after they did a recent book, extensive research in Italy. And on the little sidebar of one of the pages, it said none of the Italians admitted to using nitrate in their salami. And that was like really
admitted in,
that was hard for us to read. They didn't admit it because they don't do it.
So they're lying?
Yeah.
Like
all
what
of Italy.
exactly are you accusing them of? I don't know. Strange.
Yeah, and we see that all the time in the American literature, and that's why.
Well, the problem with it is that it rejects data.
Yeah.
Like, wait a minute. Are they actually all making salami without nitrate?
Yeah.
That might be something worth
We should
describing.
actually ask them about it.
Yeah, how do you do that? What exactly, how are you achieving that?
Yeah.
And that's the French way also when they make saucisson.
Like maybe we should actually write about that.
We could learn something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And fine, in the cookbook say, but for liability's sake, we don't recommend you do this.
Sure. That's their prerogative.
Yeah. But it rejects data, but it also it perpetuates the abstraction of the fear rather than the definition of it.
Yeah.
Like, and that's disempowering. That's discouraging. I don't know.
Yeah.
Bothers me. But why are we talking about this? Yeah, examples of botulism. That's where we got there.
Okay, well let's transition then to talking about what salami actually is then. The difference between fermenting meat versus curing or whole muscle cures.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I did want to mention, because you were talking about bacon.
Yeah.
And maybe really quick, before we get into salami,
Yeah.
can you mention the difference between bacon and maybe the thyme and salt difference that you would salt like a leg?
Oh, yeah.
A leg versus a cheek versus a...
Right. So that recipe that I gave, which I hope is coherent, for belly, it's about 4 days, adding a little bit of salt where you see the previous application dissolved and pouring off the liquid that accumulates in the tub. That's the recipe. That happens to be the recipe, so-called, for all whole muscle cures. And
in place of the salt, or the salt that you might use, it might actually be like what we use is half salt, half coarse sea salt, half sugar. Because sugar also pulls water out.
does osmodification.
That's where you could get tricky and fancy and put in flavorings of different
Bay
kinds.
leaves and juniper berries and garlic.
And that's all.
Black pepper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever you want.
Cayenne, whatever you want to get fancy with. Knowing that really, if you have quality pork, then you don't need it, but it could help. And if you have bad pork, no amount of spicing will really help it that much. So, but anyway, so covering that recipe, that salt mix, that's where you can get creative and add some sugar.
Yeah, you can vary that, up to half, 50% sugar. And or way less, it's totally up to you. So that is the basic recipe. That works for everything. That works for dry cured ham. That works for guanciale, which is the jowl or jowl bacon. That works for solid slabs of back fat. That's it. Any way that you can track the removal of water and apply salt. The only difference would be, a leg that is 6 inches thick of solid lean meat is going to take longer subjection to that process, more days than a 1.5, 2.5 inch thick belly that is 70% fat or 60% fat. So thickness, the thicker the piece, the more days on the salt. The leaner the piece, the more days on the salt, because meat, lean flesh, is more like 70% water by weight. I think it's weight. And fat is like 20%. So there's just more water to pull out of a lean piece of meat. And the leanest and the largest concentration of lean meat on any quadruped is the back leg, which is where the prosciutto and the ham comes from. And so when I use that process on back legs, I'm looking more at like 2 weeks, But again, that's a rough estimate. That's roughly. You have to discern the signs, track the reduction of liquid, witness the darkening of the color and this gradual stiffening of the flesh. I would say hams, again, matter of weeks. Belly is a matter of days, probably less than a week. And yeah, that's everything. That's how you could cure copa.
Cheeks. How do you do cheek? Like
same
the jowls?
exact. The jowls are the same thickness as a belly.
So roughly a handful of days.
Yeah. So what the difference is not the ingredients in the dry cure, the dry rub.
Right.
It's just salt and sugar. Maybe it's just salt. It's the physiological origins. It's where the cut comes from. So jowl fat is different than belly fat. That's what makes jowls different than bellies. And that's, again, that is a flavor different that is reflective of the harvest, of the integrity of the pig. So, and those will be the primary differences to each cure, is where it comes from on the pig and how long you hang it. So, and again, all a matter of personal taste. After the meat of any kind, leg, jowl, or belly, or loin, goes through that curing process that we describe, you can rinse it, dry it, and hang it for as long or as short a time as you desire. Just know that the longer it hangs, the drier, stiffer, and harder it will become. And so for bacon, like we said earlier, that's very early. You start cutting into that right away. And by the way, when you cut into the bacon, you cut a slice off or 16 slices and you fry them all up, you just hang the slab up again. That's it. You don't have to do anything to the exposed surface. It's good to go. Because you have cured the total mass of the meat. And that is probably the second, what achieves that, the full curing of the total depth of that 2-inch belly or even the 6-inch ham, is the period of equalization, which just means the salt that was on the surface through the diffusion and osmosis has continued to travel all the way throughout the full thickness of the whole muscle. And that takes a while. So with bacon, I say, and again, it depends on the humidity, but in our climate here, that takes about 2 weeks of hanging before it's fully cured all the way through to the skin. And with a leg, it's much longer. That's like 2 months. And again, you don't have to even wait till that equalization has completed. Although real bacon masters, will tell you that it's not cured until equalization, if you're going to be a perfectionist about it, which is great. I recommend you do. I like to wait on the equalization. But the surface is cured even before then, and so it's safe to hang. You will just notice it will be punchy right around the surface, right along the ridge of your bacon slice, and completely bland down by the fat where the skin was. So it won't be equalized. The texture won't have achieved a density that is more pleasing in bacon and in cured meats. So that's the recipe for all the parts.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is essentially the one that I follow. But I have such a larger volume here that I do at least 2 pigs at a time, that I have developed a slightly less hands-on method that I can give really quick. And this is specifically for bacon. So basically, specifically for things that are 2 to 4 inches in thickness. So I do this with copas, I do this with back bacon, I do this with belly bacon, I do this with jowls. And I put a whole bunch of dry cure in a tub. And right now I think I'm at what is it? It's something like 10 pounds of salt to 2.5 pounds of sugar.
Oh, okay.
So it's more salty and lots of juniper berries. And I ensure that they're relatively the same grind. So I use fine sea salt and relatively fine sugar, and I whiz up the juniper berries really fine. Dump that into my tabula rasa, and then I lay down, meat side down, the belly, and then I take hand right in that tub, right on top of that salt mix. So there's kind of a lot of salt mix, and then I rub the salt mix all over the belly, and when I lift it up, it's got a perfect even coating. Then I lay that meat side up in another tub with salt on the bottom. And the tub it's sitting in has holes, and I nest that tub into one that does not have holes so that the bacon will drain. It will not accumulate water. The bottom piece will not be sitting in a brine because the brine's draining into the bottom tub. And then I do that with the next belly. And I make a whole stack in the same tub. So stacking bellies is a great way to go for bacon quantity curing. And then I put them in the walk-in in my refrigerator for 5 days. And I don't touch them. I don't even think about them. Yeah. They just sit there and they drain. And then on day 5, I repeat the process. But this time, I only lay the bellies down and put salt on the meat side surface. I don't rub it in on the sides or the skin. Because again, the easiest thing is to oversalt. And restack, and then they all go in the walk-in again for another 5 days. And then on day 10, after a total of 10 days, I take them all out and I rinse off the salt, and then I give them a 20-minute soak in fresh water. And the 20 minutes just cuts the edge off of the salt a little bit. And then I let them hang for a couple days, which is exactly what I did this morning with all this bacon hanging above our heads.
Let's see if we could show a little all of that.
There it is. Lots of bellies up there. So that is now going to hang for, if I'm going to turn I have a dehumidifier in here, and I'm going to turn it on. And by tomorrow morning, there will be a pellicle on these guys.
Yeah, I see little drips coming down every now and again.
So the surface will be dry, which means a dry surface attracts the sweet, wonderful flavors from the smoke. A wet surface with puddled water that's still like moist and shiny acquires the Stygian bitterness of smoke,
Okay.
which is not so nice.
So you're going to smoke tomorrow.
Probably,
Yeah.
if they're dry enough.
If
I'll
they're
have to
dry-
discern
yeah.
that tomorrow
Okay.
morning. They should be. And so that's the method I follow right now.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And with whole muscle cures, any salt will work. Probably don't do iodized salt because that's going to impart probably a nasty briny flavor, like shimmery, shiny, briny sea flavor, like the ocean. And I've always used sea salt. Right now I'm using Mediterranean sea salt. I'm actually conducting an experiment right now.
No way.
Yeah.
You never do that.
I know, so fun. With Himalayan rock salt,
Oh, okay.
the pink salt, but not curing salt. It's just mined from a prehistoric ocean and then banged up and then ground and mixed in my salt with a little bit of sugar and curing my bacon. And I'm doing that with, so I'm going to compare the Himalayan rock salt bacon with the bacon cured with what the old bacon curers used to call bay salt,
Oh.
which is kind of like ancient salt bays, that they divide into squares, wide, shallow ponds. And the salt is skimmed off by hand, with long rakes. And it's kind of the first harvest of salt. It's like the fleur de sel.
Okay.
It's the first salt that crystallizes on the surface of these salt pans, as I understand it. And this one's from Portugal. It's fleur de sal. Fleur de sal. And it, so the first flower of salt or something like that. But it's moist, is what I'm trying to say. It's fluffy.
Oh, how fun.
It's downright fluffy.
That's cute.
And it's moist. And so it has a water content, which is weird for salt. Because it's still granulated, so it's more flaky and fluffy. Whereas the rock salt is, smells like key lime. I mean, it's amazing. You stick your head in the tub, it smells like lime. But it's got a lot of other minerals in it. So both the Portuguese bay salt and the rock salt are less salty salts than your standard distilled sea salt. And that's kind of fun. They're less salty because they have trace minerals of many descriptions and kinds. And even some oils, I think, and at least for the bay salt. And so that is all going to have an effect on the flavor. At the very least, it will affect the relative salt content compared to the sea salt bacon that I also made a
You're
test
actually
batch
tracking this experiment on our membership, right? Or
That's right.
You've created some harvest films over
Yeah,
them.
I am. I filmed myself doing this.
Okay.
And I'm going to film the smoking and the slicing and the frying and the taste testing.
So if you want to find out how these experiments turned out,
Yeah.
join membership next time it's open in the fall.
Do.
Yeah. And also I wanted to mention the source of these incredible salts, Saltworks, right? Saltworks.com.
Saltworks in Woodinville, Washington.
Yeah. And they sell, you can get a wholesale account with them, and they sell all over the country. They ship them and Bitterman salt. They've been also a good...
I haven't actually got anything from Bitterman.
Okay.
Yeah, they're in Portland area.
We've desired to try them, but we haven't done that yet.
Saltworks has been great. I get 40, 50-pound bags or something shipped right to the house.
For a decent price.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
We have done our research, and it's hard to get it in bulk for a price that doesn't just make you really sad pressing that purchase button. So.
Oh, speaking of pressing purchase buttons.
Uh-oh.
I bought something that I've wanted to try for a long time. I bought some bacon.
Oh,
yeah.
From Benton's.
Benton's.
Okay, you did it.
Yeah, everybody knows what that is. It's the famous bacon in, where is he? Tennessee or Kentucky? I can't remember.
I can't remember.
Benton's hams.
You could look them up.
Benton. They're kind of, they developed some fame in the foodie world. But I haven't purchased bacon in like a decade.
I know. I don't think I've heard that sentence come out of you.
Yeah, it felt weird to say. But I'm really excited to try it because he follows traditional methods. I think he does have a little bit of nitrite in his bacon, which is fine, which we'll talk about. But he lets it age. He does prolonged equalization time. Again, it's really important. It seems like the thing that really sets apart artisan, really cool craft bacon, both of those phrases, but good bacon is how committed you are to that equalization period.
Yeah. Not
And-
just rushing it out the door,
Right.
but letting it sit.
That's the first corner that's cut,
Yeah.
because
Yeah, that's
takes
time.
time. So
That's
that's what he
cool.
does. I
I'm
think it's
excited to try that.
15 days or 22 or something. He's got a long equalization period and then like a solid 2 or 3 day hickory smoke.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
So I ordered a bunch of that, and it should be here right when our Mangalitsa,
Could do a taste test.
Portuguese and Himalayan bacon is done. So,
Neat.
there's so much we could talk about.
I
bacon.
know. Well, yeah, and so because I was wanting this to go into salami too, but I'm looking at the time
I
and
know.
we're already like pushing 2 hours.
Yeah,
So
and that's fermentation.
maybe we should say any last words on bacon,
Yeah.
which I have a couple questions I could probably throw out, and then we'll save salami for its own
Yeah,
episode.
I think it'd be good.
And then maybe we'll make confit its own episode too. So
Yeah.
kind of a 3-part meat curing, meat preservation,
Yeah,
trilogy.
yeah.
But I wanted to ask, well, bacon as its own term, as its British term, doesn't always just refer to the belly. It refers to, it can be shoulder, back bacon.
Yeah,
It's more like the whole pig
yeah.
is bacon.
Yeah, it is, because etymologically, bacon comes from the word, like, it's back.
Right.
Yeah, it's the back back stuff.
Uh-huh.
And if you look at a quadruped,
That's
pig
mostly a
especially,
back.
it's all back.
It's
right?
just a big back
Yeah,
walking
except
around.
for the 4 legs.
Yeah, that carry the back.
Yeah. And so really that's what British bacon is. So when I say the word bacon, I'm talking about whole muscle cures. Like that's it. And even there was a while in American curing when bacon meant dry salted. So it could be anything. It just means if it's been dry salted as opposed to wet brined, it's bacon. That's what bacon means. And I think in America, production bacon, you're not allowed to use nitrate at all because of an old study done in like the 70s that is highly disputed, where they decided that bacon cured with nitrate can produce nitrosamines. And I don't know how to say that word, but it's a carcinogen. And but I think one of the disputed things about that study was that they bloody nuked the bacon. They carbonized it. So yeah, if you burn the heck out of your bacon and then you eat it, then you might get some carcinogens. And so for that reason, they don't do nitrate. But they do, because if you get the uncured bacon at the store that says nitrate free, that's not actually true. That's just a strange labeling thing. And what that means is that the bacon, they used something else. They used a so-called natural source of nitrate, which is celery juice powder. And only recently have they been able to measure the quantity of nitrate in celery juice powder. It's a highly processed thing. It's not just celery seed. That's a spice,
Yeah.
That's not what it is. It's highly processed because there are nitrates in celery. And so it is possible that the uncured bacon in the store, the nitrate-free bacon, has more nitrites in it than the standard bacon.
Yeah.
So I think it is normal and actually required to put nitrite in bacon. And nitrite is what nitrate will reduce to under the proper conditions. So one thing it helps to note is the difference between nitrate and nitrite. And it wasn't until the 1930s that we could even add nitrite to anything because we couldn't make it. I think it was the 1930s they figured out how to isolate it in a lab, and then mass produce it. And now anytime you buy it, it's made in a lab. Same with sodium nitrate, it's made in a lab. There was a day when I think in Chile, there were saltpeter mines, and these were veins in like this arid desert climate where they would mine saltpeter. and saltpeter is potassium nitrate. And that is all that the bacon curers had available to them. And there is actually quite a long history of, like, we have tapestries from the 13th century of people harvesting saltpeter from caves.
Wow.
So it's very old. And its use in bacon is very old. And what it does is you use it in very tiny amounts. And so it's just a micro fraction of your cure, of your dry rub, saltpeter, potassium nitrate. And it is completely inert, and like it does nothing unless it's reduced to nitrite in the meat. So today we don't have to go through that because we can synthetically produce nitrite.
Right.
And so usually, especially in the case of bacon, it's just easier to add nitrite.
Yeah, because the process of getting the saltpeter to turn into the nitrite is laborious.
It's laborious. It requires skill. It's kind of cool. And so the old bacon curers, like there's a few things that convert nitrate to nitrite. Okay. And they are anathematized in modern food production systems.
Okay.
And they are 3.
Okay.
Staphylococcus and Micrococcus bacteria.
Wow. And
warm temperatures. So when you would salt your bacon with saltpeter and mostly sea salt, you had, after the curing process, you had to hang it in a warm environment. So above 41 degrees Fahrenheit or 42, so above refrigeration. And it had to have bacteria present to help convert the nitrate to nitrite, or to reduce it to nitrite, because the bacteria acts as a catalyst for that reaction. And there had to be lots of pigment in the flesh of the pig. So that's, if we're going to say 3, it's warm temperatures, bacteria, and pigment or myoglobin in the flesh.
So a healthy pork.
A healthy pig.
And maybe most definitely scalded and scraped.
Exactly.
Because the skin has that bacteria on it.
So to convert nitrate to nitrite, you got to scald and scrape your pig
Yeah.
because all the bacteria is on that skin.
Yeah.
And as just drawing your knife through the flesh, you're inoculating it with Staphylococcus and Micrococcus bacteria. And then you apply the saltpeter to that and put it in a warm climate. And then the butcher's job was to conscientiously and expertly nurse the nitrate into nitrite. He had to actually cure it, which means to care.
To care.
Curare from the Latin. And you could deduce your progress, because when you slice the bacon, you could see how far the nitrite has penetrated because of its reaction with the myoglobin. You could see how pink it was. And so that is not an easy thing. It's really cool. And we don't do that anymore because we need to make bacon real fast.
Too much time,
and so today, bellies fresh off the pig come down a belt and they are stitch pumped, which is the maximum number of needles that can be injected into a pork belly without disintegrating it. Oh, because that's how far they need to go.
Oh my gosh.
They inject brine into it.
Yes.
And it's nitrite. So it really requires like no conversion. And here's the thing about nitrite. All your curing can happen in refrigeration. Okay. Which everybody likes. Because that's not where bacteria can really proliferate quickly under those temperatures. Yeah. So it's more, again, it's just seasoned. It acquires the briny, acid, tangy, sourly, bacony flavor that we have passively come to associate with the flavor of bacon.
But it's not cured.
And it'll do it in
it's not
just
preserved.
a couple hours.
Really?
Yeah, and if anything, the smoking will take a little while, and if they smoke with smoke at all, which it's usually just liquid smoke, which is gross. But it's also, they do need to track the progress of the nitrite throughout.
Well, yeah, especially if they're doing something, they are creating micro incisions in the meat now. That's actually
puncture wounds.
Right. That's a little bit unsafe compared to, keeping it all one flat muscle like how we do it.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because, it's safe because of the nitrite.
Right.
So that keeps the pH low. Right. But puncture wounds, that's how you get tetanus.
Yeah.
Which is Clostridium tetanus. I don't know how to say it, but it's a Clostridium bacteria.
Okay.
And the reason puncture wounds from rusty nails are not so good is because puncture wounds create an anaerobic environment.
Yeah.
Rather than just like a cut or a gash.
Right. It creates a hole and then covers up the hole.
It's the same thing. Yeah.
So it's safe, but only because they first created a problem that then had to be remedied by an artificial
with the nitrite.
Band-Aid. Yeah.
And the nitrite just keeps the pH super low.
Yeah.
And why use saltpeter in the first place? Even if you're going to do that cool, traditional method and nurse it into nitrite. And I think that makes a much more gentle bacon. Mm-hmm. It has the capacity to. Because anytime you add the sourly tang of acid to the salt and fat combination, that's really good. That's the triumvirate.
Yeah.
That's like when Mark Antony joined Brutus and Cassius.
Yes.
It's really the persuasive stuff, and it mellows things out and allows you to get closer to Caesar. But it's it's the tanginess. It helps you eat more salt and fat. It's like sauerkraut and sausage, right?
Yeah.
So that's the cool thing about saltpeter.
Yeah.
And I think people should figure it out. Mm-hmm. I've done it a few times, and it totally works. Mm-hmm. Like once. I did it once.
Yeah, I remember trying it, and it was enjoyable.
Yeah.
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 What else? What else is there about bacon? It's such a huge topic
I know.
that
I love talking about
it's
bacon.
not exhaustive. Yeah. I know there's other facets of it that we haven't explored, but
there is the smoking, and that could be its whole own episode.
Oh yeah, well that'll be its whole episode probably.
Yeah.
Let me check my notes here.
You don't have to smoke your bacon, by the way.
Yeah, green bacon.
It can be green.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I guess I wanted to encourage people to go for it, like we do almost every episode, because if they look on a lot of online forums or groups, there's that fear-based mentality,
right?
Of no, you have to do it this way. You have to use nitrates and nitrites, and you have to follow recipes exactly. Yeah. Even though they don't make sense, because that's not taking into consideration the number one important factor, which is the health of your pork.
Yeah.
And then number two, which is like the nature of the belly itself. Like how thick is it? How water dense is it? And anyway, I just wanted to encourage people to start experimenting, using science, using prowess, using common sense, using their own noses, and all the things that we've talked about.
And it's not imprecise to say use your nose either.
Yeah.
Because the thing that will happen if something bad does happen, you will know.
Yeah.
That's an incredibly liberating fact.
Yeah.
The only place where it's possible for the aromaless, invisible, and tasteless poison to sneak up on you like a Trojan horse is in salami. That's where it's theoretically possible, and that's only botulism, because you can't taste it, and you can't smell it, and you can't see it. It occurs in such small micro quantities, and it really is just a micro quantity that is very dangerous. Whereas when we're talking about whole muscle cures, their spoilage is unmistakable. You're never going to accidentally eat bad bacon. I can almost guarantee it, because you have a sniffer, and your sniffer right above your eater will detect the spoilage if it's not blatantly obvious in the first case. So bacteria in general doesn't occur in a vacuum. It's the result of a hospitable environment. It occurs in an ecology. There will be other signs, especially with whole muscle cures. I don't think I've ever lost a slab of bacon, ever. I've lost a few hams, but never a slab of bacon in memory. And what would happen is the surface of the bacon would be populated by bad guys. And usually, and again, these are not tasteless, invisible bad guys. They are proclaiming their colonization. They're planting their flag on the bacon, declaring it theirs, and farting and sliming all over the place to deter other bacteria to take over. to colonize. That's what they do. And so it will be aromatically obvious. Stick your head in a dumpster behind the cheapest restaurant you can find in the middle of summer, and you will know what bad bacon smells like. It is the smell of food rot. Everyone knows that smell. It's just so unmistakable. Not only will you recognize it, but you are so unlikely to, put something like that in your mouth. I mean, you're not going to do it. So all that to say, if the bacon goes bad, it's aromatically unmistakable. You will not eat it accidentally.
Yeah. Well, and I think you said a word a few paragraphs back that is an important one to remember in talking about anything meat related or anything scientific, or and that's the word ecology, and not considering ourselves separate from the ecology of meat production.
Yeah.
We are part of it,
Or
actually.
biological entities.
And that's a scientific thing to say. And that we've been given this amazing gift and prowess and ability to enter into the process too. We're not like in lab coats separate from it. Like, we can interact with these amazing products.
We are equipped with bacterial detection capacity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something to take seriously.
That's why we have really good senses of smell and a little thing called the gag reflex.
Right, and you have a story about that.
Oh, yeah. So the thing about the gag reflex is that it's involuntary, okay?
It's a reflex.
Yeah, you can't, it's really rough. You can't quite override that one. And I know because I tried once. And you know the ham I cut down.
Right. He's never experimenting.
No, we did have a ham recently that went bad, and it was from way at the beginning, and it smelled fine for 2 years, and it wasn't until I cut it off of our rafter, and I started peeling the skin off, and immediately I got the.
Oh, really?
And it just hits you. You're like, oh my gosh, like you're almost tearing, and it's just. Whoa. And I discern it was blood contamination. Oh. So that is the one inroad that bacteria has to the interior of a ham is the femoral artery. Okay. So that is the way that ham might spoil. And the femoral artery happens to be laden with blood, which is water. Delicious. And so that stinks. And when that was colonized, I cut into the skin, and it immediately just was honking. And it reminded me of when my friend brought me a ham that he was uncertain about, which kind of belies my story. I'm surprised he was uncertain about it, because it was I was certain about it. He was new. Yeah. And he was still developing. And he's bold, and he's heard me, say, yeah, go for it so many times. He believes you, yeah. So everyone, please just use your brains. But he brought this ham to a party, and I knew it was off, like from 20 yards away. Yeah. It was very obvious, very obvious. Which is an argument for developing your taste and your palate and your smellscapes. Like, smell wine, learn things so that you recognize the off stuff with just 110% certainty. But anyway, he brought it up, and I wanted to test out, my theory. And we cut into it, and I could see the same thing has just happened to our ham. It was blood contamination. That's how the bacteria got in there. Because otherwise, the leg is sterile on the inside, right? Yeah. Mostly. Muscle tissue is not a host to bacteria unless it's crept in there from the outside and then permeated through capillaries and stuff. Yeah. So I cut off some of the skin, and the aroma just became worse and worse. But I tried some. I put it in my mouth. Just to see. And the flavor didn't give off the horrible, stinging poison bitterness that you might expect from rotting meat. But nonetheless, I could not swallow. My body would not let me swallow. It was really amazing. The smell was enough to cue my gagger to override my thinker and say, no swallow. We are not swallowing.
Spit it out, moron.
Spit it out. And I did. Yeah. And I tried to swallow. Oh. I tried. I chewed it for a while, and nothing. I was really shocked at how strong that gag reflex was. It was extremely potent. Yeah. So even if you're dumb enough to put it in your mouth, like me, you probably won't even be able to swallow it. So it's hard to limit the liberation of that fact if you just know that with whole muscle cures, spoilage will be obvious. The implications of that are limitless. That means that if it's not obviously bad, it's not bad. Mm-hmm. So when it gets cobwebs on it, when it's dusty, when the fat is all yellow and even a little bitter, that's not vomitous spoilage. If it's not horrible and rank, it's not bad.
Yeah.
So that's the whole muscle cure secret, I think. And not so with salami, because there, again, it is theoretically possible, because it's an anaerobic environment, for the thing you can't taste, see, or smell to proliferate and be dangerous.
Yeah, and we'll get into that next episode. But yeah, and I was thinking one last thing. So there's the danger of it going off, which we should be able to mitigate by just paying attention with all the senses that we have. And then the opposite danger, and I say that in quotes, it's not really a danger, but it is, well, you always say that it's the easiest thing in the world to do is to oversalt your bacon. So, and if that happens on the other end of the spectrum, that you shouldn't be worried about, because actually, well, you shouldn't be worried that it's dangerous because it's so salty that nothing's going to live to hurt you. But it's for your own, you don't want to waste bellies on oversalting, and you haven't. You actually can still use that meat. You can either reverse the process through soaking it, as you mentioned, and you can soak it even longer than 20 minutes. You can soak it for a day if it's rock hard. And
that will reduce the salt significantly.
Yeah. And if you have done that, and even if you end up with something that's a little too salty, you still haven't lost it. You can put it in beans, and it still becomes a culinary tool.
Pretend like it is your salt.
Right.
But it's just porky, smoky salt.
Right.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
That is actually, we would consider all bacon made before, I don't know, I'm going to just guess, before 1930 to be oversalted.
Yeah.
Like unpalatably salty.
Right.
People were salting bacon to preserve it. And it was only with the wide mass production of bacon, and more specifically the wide availability of salt in the home kitchen, that bacon became less and less salty, and now we've developed a taste for it. And salt tolerance in your food is one of those things that is a habit that can be acquired or disacquired. So like if you want, you can actually build up to a saltier bacon.
Yeah.
And if you will find that even when you nail your bacon and you make it at the salt level that is pleasant to you, it's still going to be saltier than the grocery store bacon.
Yeah.
Because you're curing it with salt.
Yeah.
Not just
Not flavorings.
sodium erythorbates and ascorbic acid, and nitrite, which just makes it tangy.
Okay.
Not salty. So it was the case that before everyone had salt in their kitchens, everything was bland, except for their bacon, their butter, and their cheese. So all the old recipes for cheese, as well as cured meats, were just higher in salt content, because that's all the salt there was in the kitchen. And so insofar as you could mix cheese, butter, and bacon with your food and your vegetables, which we all ought to do, with diligence and conviction, that would be the salt for those things. They were the mechanisms of savor.
Yeah, we often we don't often go to restaurants, but when we go to restaurants, we often find that, like, if it's a breakfast joint or something, and they're marketing, like, in the area, really nice bacon for this area, and I don't know the company's names, but it's supposed to be really high-end bacon. And we've tried it, and I wouldn't say it tastes bad. I would say it has almost no taste. It's just really bland, like you said. It's so mild, and it's a loss.
Yeah,
really.
So be duly warned when you start making your own bacon, especially after eating it for about 3 weeks, you're going to become accustomed to it on a sensory level, and you're not going to be able to go back to store-bought bacon.
Yeah.
So,
and you're going to get critiqued too by certain a lot of times the older generation who've been warned off
People
salt
will
and-
find it too salty. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I had this experience when I brought a prosciutto to a party, and I was carving it up for people, and there was a woman who was visiting locally to teach Spanish at the local elementary school, direct from Spain, and she's going to be here for a semester and then return back to her home, and she loved it. She recognized the prosciutto or the jamon, I guess it would be, as what she ate at her home. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, yes, that's what I want. But then, there's always a few people, they take one bite and their verdict is a single word verdict. They say, salty.
It's too salty.
It's like, well, yeah, it was cured with salt.
It's got salt in it.
And what that you just need wine in this hand when you're putting prosciutto in with this hand. That's like, it's a package deal.
Yeah.
And, fear not, you will become accustomed to salt. The thing is, it's not like you'll end up eating more salt either. If you're eating junk food, or, not even just junk food, but all of our food, processed foods, have a ton of salt in them. You just don't taste it. The sodium is disguised. Mm-hmm. The thing about bacon and prosciutto, again, cured naturally, is that they have integrity. They don't need to hide. And so the salt you taste is the salt you're eating. Mm-hmm. They're not deceptive.
Yeah. That sounds like a wrap for bacon. I think we've exhausted that subject. Well, I mean, there's still more, but yeah.
Didn't even show off any of the books.
Yeah. So we'll end there with our bacon explanation, and we'll talk about salami and maybe confit in the next couple of episodes. Yeah. And before we leave you, I wanted to mention that we are going to have a baby in a few weeks.
What?
You better know. It's so we're gonna be leaving the podcast for until June. Really, we've been doing these once a month anyway, so there won't be a big disruption. Yeah. But for us, we're not going to record for a few weeks, and we'll see you back in June, and maybe we'll have a little Meatsmith Junior to show off. So that'll be exciting. And if you want to support this podcast, remember we have a place to do that, and that's on patreon.com/Meatsmith. And we've got some great patrons there, and I want to try to get some questions out from that little community. It's a growing community. It's still small, but it is growing. We had a few more people sign up this week, which is good.
Oh, cool.
And so that's another great way to get your questions in to this podcast. And
because we can build episodes around the questions you ask.
Yeah. And I mean, we're ready to do that. We're excited to do that. So, and in fact, I know the nitrate thing was one of the questions that someone answered. So, so look us up there. And, I also wanted to mention too, I don't know if I've said this because this is on YouTube, but we also are on iTunes. And if you've just seen this podcast on YouTube, we have how many? I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 other full episodes that are only on iTunes. They were our first episodes. And so if you're wanting more of this content, there is some more also on iTunes. You just have to look it up, a Meatsmith Harvest there, and you can find a handful more there for your listening enjoyment. Yeah. So that's it. Without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time. Hello, Meatsmiths.
Hi, everybody.
Let's start over.
Why is starting so hard?
I don't know. Starting is really hard.
Just, say stuff.